The field ranger is at the forefront of anti-poaching and conservation efforts throughout Africa and globally. As the law enforcement component of nature conservation, they're often called upon to work in harsh and hostile environments. To do their jobs ethically, safely and effectively, they need to be well trained. My guest today is a trainer of field rangers. Calvin Kipling, welcome to Tales Less Told.
Thank you very much. Nice to be here.
Nice to have you here.
Good.
Now, you didn't take a direct route into anti-poaching. Tell us how you got to this position.
Yeah, it's a bit of a long story, but to put it in a nutshell, I knew from when I was very young that I was going to be doing something in the field of conservation. I was lucky enough to be introduced to it as far back as I can remember. My parents would take us on trips into the national parks of South Africa, in southern Africa actually. We would go for a month, 2 months at a time, real deep into the bush, proper camping, not in chalets or anything like that. And I grew a great love for nature and conservation. I believed I wanted to be what you call a game ranger, which is, that term is very loosely used nowadays. But when I finished school, I didn't go directly there. I thought about doing personal training, working in the gyms. I did that qualification. I worked in a gym for a couple of years. I trained high school sports, basketball, hockey, that kind of stuff. Always in the back of my mind, I knew I was going to be in the bush. Just don't think I was quite ready for that yet. And then in 2009, the year after I finished school, or the year I finished school, this rhino poaching crisis really kicked off, or started kicking off in South Africa. I think the first year we lost about 8, and then it just went up to 30, and then it just was an exponential curve on the way up. So I decided, okay, now's the time I need to get involved. I can't just sit here and watch that happen. So I looked around for a bit to see what I could do. I looked at the game ranger title, which is actually what you call a field ranger nowadays. They seem to be referred to as game rangers, and that definitely wasn't for me. And then I saw an advertisement for an anti-poaching unit, which was something no one had even heard of back then. Anti-poaching back then was a couple of Africans picking snares out of the bush. That was what anti-poaching was seen as. But this unit I found, ProTrack Anti-Poaching Unit, did an extensive 6-week course, which was revolving around the escalating threat of rhino poaching. So very militarized, very strict, concentrated very much on old military tactics, small team tactics and that kind of stuff. Did the 6-week course in 2011, I think it was, and worked in the bush as a field ranger for about a year after that in the Greater Kruger National Park.
So when you say field ranger, just there in an anti-poaching capacity, is that right?
Correct, correct. So again, it's a very loosely used term. A field ranger has a very, very large role in conservation. He is an anti-poaching officer, he is a fence attendant, he is a researcher. So field ranger is a very large term. But now with this crisis of conservation or anti-poaching and rhino poaching, the field ranger's job is majority anti-poaching. So I would say if you look at it in quarters, 3/4 of his job is now anti-poaching. Whereas if you go back as little as 10 years, a field ranger's job was, assessing the veld, looking at the trees, the grasses, deciding when to burn, pretty much assisting the warden in all of these kind of things. So I worked solely as what you would call an anti-poaching officer for about a year. Saw a lot of things, got some great experience, made contact with poachers several times, made some arrests, got to see what life was like on the ground. And from there, the company pulled me aside and said, do I want to move on to the training division of the company as an assistant instructor? There's a position opening, would I be interested? So I said, yeah, sure, it'll be great to help assist and to put across my knowledge and my passion into prospective rangers or prospective anti-poaching officers. And I got promoted shortly after that to a senior instructor, and I stayed on with them for about 4 years, training rangers for that organization. In that 4 years I must have trained in excess of 300 rangers in security and anti-poaching. From there I got a bit, I don't know what the word would be, I needed a change of scenery and a change of environment. I still enjoyed training. I still enjoyed what I was doing, but I got a bit of a passion or a taste of the military lifestyle. I enjoyed the discipline very much, which is incorporated into what we call a paramilitary lifestyle. I enjoyed the structure, and I enjoyed the cohesion, the feeling of being in a team.
Camaraderie.
Camaraderie is the word I'm looking for. So I looked around at positions or opportunities for myself to join the military. In South Africa, due to the current political state that we're in, it wasn't an option for myself. So the next option for myself was the French Foreign Legion. They offer recruits from all around the world to join their ranks and to join the French military. So I went over there and I started the pre-selection process, which I went through fine. I spent about 4 weeks between Auban in Paris and Fort-de-Nagent. I went through the whole pre-selection process, did all the fitness tests, did the psychometric tests, made it through, and then when I was in my last phase in Fort-de-Nagent before training began, they called me aside and they said that they've found irregularity in my heartbeat. They didn't use the word palpitations, they used some other word, but it pretty much meant that I had heart palpitations. So they sent me to a second base where they had the same machine, put me on there again and said, unfortunately, I can't move on to the final phase of the training due to my heart problems. Which was quite a blow to me, because I had pretty much dedicated 5 years of my life to that. Because once you've signed the contract, it's 5 years. There's no way out. And I decided to that. I committed myself to that. And unfortunately, it didn't work out for me. It wasn't meant to be.
Do you think that closed the door for you at any other military?
Well, from what the research I've done is the machines they use there are highly sensitive to anything to do with heart problems and that kind of stuff. And even if they have the slightest inkling that there could be something wrong, because there's such a massive number of prospective recruits coming in, they can be highly selective with their training and their selection for their training. Personally, I don't believe I have anything wrong. I haven't gone and done another heart test or anything like that, but in my basic training with ProTrack, I was the fittest guy. I finished all my runs first. I was right up in front with all my physical exercise. I still am very physically active, and I've never had any problems. I've never noticed anything myself with my heart. So it hasn't necessarily closed the doors, but that was pretty much my last door. There's no other real options for me for a military career, because we used to, as South Africans, be able to apply for the British military, being part of the Commonwealth. That's no longer available to us. The cutoff age for the South African military is 23. So you can't join any at the older than 23. I'm currently in the process of applying to be a reservist police officer here at the Hoedspruit station. I can only really follow up on that once I get back from my next trip. That's going to be 3 months, but I'm in the process of that. I've always I've had a passion for law enforcement, especially when it comes to conservation, and the conservation industry is very militarized, and I think the experience from a military background definitely has a lot to add into conservation, what we're doing. So it was unfortunate the way that went, but everything happens for a reason. I'd like to believe that. So yeah, after that disappointment, I came straight back, and I knew I had to get straight back into conservation. I think I didn't even have a week before I'd contacted some of the people I knew who did the training for the Kruger National Park, and went there, spoke to the guy who runs it there, Ruben de Kock of the South African Wildlife College. He runs the Protected Area Integrity Department, or African Field Ranger Training. And I jumped straight into the Wildlife College, where I'm working at the moment, training field rangers globally. I've done courses now. I've been with them for just over a year. Presented courses, done a maritime course in Mozambique, done an advanced field ranger course in Mozambique. I've presented a basic field ranger course for the Kruger National Park. I've presented 2 advanced courses for the Greater Kruger region. I've gone to Malawi to present a basic field ranger course. I was there now for 2 months. The beginning of the year I was in Myanmar, Burma, teaching basic and advanced and train the trainer courses there, and I head back there now on the 31st of this month of October for 3 months, doing pretty much operational training and operational evaluations. So we're going to deploy with the rangers there, see how they're doing, see their tactics, what are they doing right, what they're doing wrong, pretty much just an observation role. And then once we've got pretty much an idea of how they're operating, bring them back into a training position and try to add some value to the way they're patrolling, teach them some new techniques, try to transfer as much skills as we can to help make their patrols more effective. And then once that's done, we're going to deploy with them again to see if it's actually helping the way that they're doing things there.
Okay, we'll come back to Myanmar or Burma. What makes a good ranger?
I can tell you the most important thing, more important than anything to do with physicality, more important than any military background training, anything like that, is passion. A field ranger has to have passion. He has to care about what he's doing. Same as a soldier has to believe in what he's fighting for, a ranger has to have a passion and a love for what he is fighting for, if you want to call it that. And it's extremely difficult. In Africa especially, or anywhere in the world, I would say up to 95% of our rangers are just in it for a job. Work is very difficult to come by in South Africa. In Africa, we are a very, very poor continent. We're a very poor country in South Africa. And they see an advertisement for job openings. We need 50 field rangers, come and do a selection. That's how 90% of it goes out. An advert goes out into the newspaper and they say, we've got an opening for 50 field rangers. We'll get 200 coming in, we'll do a selection through the 200 and we'll pick the 50 most suitable rangers. But I'd say 95% of them, if you had to ask them what is your dream job, wouldn't say field ranger. They would say maybe policeman, maybe fireman, generally in the law enforcement industry, but working in the bush is tough. It's very, very difficult. So you have to really love it to be able to slog it out. And so going back to your question, the number one thing somebody can have is passion and a love for what he's doing, a belief in for what he's doing, for sure.
Looking at those figures a little closer, you said 50 it was the intake figure, and you reckon maybe 5% have a passion for it. Is it likely that within a few years a lot of those 50, perhaps 40, 45 have moved on and gone on to do something?
There is a massive turnover in the field. As I mentioned, it's a very tough working environment. It's very, very difficult. To work as a field ranger, it's one of the harshest working environments you can have. You've got no creature comforts of home. The food is pretty much the dry rations that you can carry with you. The sleeping arrangements, there's bugs, there's spiders, there's scorpions, there's snakes, there's the weather. Never mind the poachers and the threat of poaching, which is different depending on where in the world you are. The threat of wildlife is always there, I have a very close or personal friend who trained with me in ProTrack who was eaten by a lion while he was out on patrol. I know of 2 people who were killed by snake bites. I know of 2 rangers who I've personally either trained or worked with who were shot and killed by poachers. And all of this is for a salary, an average salary in South Africa, you're probably looking at 5,000 to 6,000 rand
a month.
A month, and that's actually a well-paid salary for a field ranger.
So I'm just sort of doing a few calculations in Australian dollars. That's about $500 or $600, maybe $400 US dollars a month.
That's for South Africa, and that's for probably one of your higher rangers. Your bottom of the rangers who've been working for 6 months to a year with very little experience, you're probably looking at 3,000 rand a month, and that in an industry standard globally is high. In Malawi, where I was now, your rangers who've been working for 15 years get paid in rands, maybe 1,500 rands a month.
Wow! And how does that compare as a salary to other Malawians?
It's good, but it's not great. It's better paid than a lot of the conservation officers or rangers. Their salaries may be a bit better than the police in Malawi. This is solely for the fact that we have so much donor funding and projects involved who are willing to help out with these salaries, because the Malawian government isn't making much money from conservation. They've had very, very high poaching crisis. With regards to their national parks, not many people go and visit them. Maybe they'll go to Lake Malawi and see the lakes. So conservation isn't bringing in income for them, so they can't afford to put much back into the salaries. So the projects assist and they help with paying salaries, building houses for the rangers, getting the school set up so the rangers have at least a school system for their children. So they're actually looked after a little bit better than a lot of the other government sectors, I'd say, such as police and firemen and that kind of stuff. But it's still very, very far behind where we are in South Africa, from what I can see.
You mentioned a few of the hardships as a ranger
Yes.
within an APU or an anti-poaching unit. Can you tell us a little more about the life one? What do they learn? What are the roles that they play?
So one thing, there's been quite a debate on it, on what do we expect of our rangers or of our officers, because the role that they hold is such a vast job. We concentrate, yes, on anti-poaching, which involves on a day-to-day basis, you need to know your tracking, you need to have very good bush skills, you need to be very proficient with your firearm, you have to be very physically fit, you have to have good communication skills, you need to be able to read the terrain, do your map reading, you need to have a very, very high level of self-discipline when it comes to the way you conduct yourself, because realistically, on majority of our reserves in South Africa, you're going to be lucky if you make contact with the poacher once every 2-3 months, but you expect your ranger to be on the ball every second of every day because the threat is always there. So the role that they hold is very, very vast, and the pressure on their shoulders is unbelievable. There's so many people sitting on the outside who expect the special forces type soldier, these Rambo people running around with battle jackets and webbing, and they expect this level of operation from a ranger who more than likely has done a 6-week training course and hasn't shot a rifle for 6 months to a year, and he's getting paid very, very little. He's got this, what we spoke about, the hardships of working in the field and living in the field and everything that comes along with that, which is not being able to speak to your family, not being able to have your cell phone with you, and then expecting this ranger to be motivated and dedicated to his role. It's a lot to ask of someone. It really is. So yeah, it's difficult. It's very, very difficult, and the answer to it isn't clear either. There's no set answer in that. Sorry, going back to your question, what I spun myself off target there.
No, that's quite all right. Look, you touched on something there, and I want to explore it if we can. Look, it's not a well-paid job. It's tough. There are a lot of issues associated with it, including the one that you said that for the majority, perhaps it's not their calling
Yes.
in life, and also the fact that they may actually have very few contacts, if any at all, in their working career, perhaps. But do you see that apathy in a number of rangers that you see when you come to do inspections, various places? Do you go, gee whiz, we've got a bit of a problem here. Can we rely on these guys?
To be 100% honest with you, now this changes geographically. I've been very fortunate enough to move around a lot within South Africa, within Africa, and globally. So that's a very broad question. It does change, but generally we get sent to areas which are very poor. We get sent to areas which need the donor funding, which need the projects assisting them, and we try to lift up the standard of the rangers. But to ask if the rangers or the wildlife is in good hands, most of the places, especially the government organizations, I would say no. There's too much mismanagement. There's not enough retraining. There's not enough support for the rangers. They feel very neglected by their organizations with regards to gear, with regards to accommodation, with regards to even things as basic meals and food. So a lot of the government organizations in Africa, I'm talking about now, not specifically South Africa, do neglect their rangers and are very underfunded, and the level of corruption is ridiculously high. So the rangers being on the bottom of the level of any organization, the field rangers at the bottom. And then if you're lucky, if you move up, maybe you'll become a reaction driver, and then you'll become an area manager, and then you'll climb the ladder. But the basic field ranger at the bottom, I've been to reserves where they're not issued with any boots. They're walking around in sandals. They don't get issued a firearm. They don't have a sleeping bag. They've got a grey blanket. And then they get sent out to go and face armed poachers in these reserves. And that, I would say, is majority of Africa is in that situation where the field rangers are undertrained, under-equipped, underpaid, and a lot is asked of them in those situations. And that's generally on the government level how it's looking in Africa, not in South Africa. In South Africa it's a little bit different. Our sandparks rangers are well trained and well equipped where they need to be. The management level is always a bit of a gamble. Some areas are very well managed and they utilize the funds better than other areas. I've heard stories of rangers in high risk areas with a lot of rhino not being allowed to work night shift because the manager doesn't want to spend the money from the budget to pay extra for night shift. So at night the rangers aren't allowed to work. If they hear a gunshot, if they hear anything, they can't respond because the manager's not willing to pay them extra to go out on a night shift duty.
Wow.
So
I don't know what to say in relation to that. Gee.
Yeah.
Describe, we were touching on sort of what they do. Can you tell us a little bit more? What does a patrol look like?
Okay.
What does a unit look like?
Sure. So let's use an example. So any reserve is broken down into sections. So Kruger National Park has a bunch of different sections, and each section is run as its own unit. So that unit will have the area manager or the area commander. He is the top of the field ranger level before you'll step into your wardens and that kind of stuff. So he'll be the most highly ranked person in the unit, depending on whether you're government or private. You might have a rank of sergeant or commander. And then below him, he'll have his field ranger teams. Depending on the area, once again, it's normally either 2-man or 4-man patrol teams. The 4-man patrol team is used generally where there's a higher risk against the teams, when the poachers can be coming in not only with a hunting rifle, but maybe they'll be accompanied by some or the semi-automatic, fully automatic rifle. Generally the risk is a bit higher. You'll deploy them in a 4-man team. So within that 4-man team you'll have your commander, the highest ranked person within that team unit. Again, it can be a sergeant, a corporal, whatever organization you're working for, it depends. And then you'll have the 3 scouts who are with him. They are the lower ranked team members. On your average day, you'll normally start off doing with a perimeter patrol or a detection patrol, whether it's along a cut line, a fence line, something like that. You want to see if you've had any incursions or excursions during the night. So your team will be tasked to patrol either, like I say, a fence line, a cut line, a riverbed, somewhere where it's easy to detect if there's any traces of people coming in or out. So that can be from first light normally. You want to be up at 4:30 just before the sun comes up because you want to detect it as early as possible. You'll do your fence check, your perimeter patrol, or whatever other commands have come down during the night. That'll take you up till normally around midday. Once you've done that, you're going to do a patrol inside the reserve, granted you haven't found anything coming in. You'll do your internal patrols. You'll start checking your water points, your areas where your high-risk animals are frequenting, whether it's rhino poaching, elephant poaching, pangolin, whatever the case may be. You're going to want to go and check your zones with the high frequency of those animals. So the patrol will either spread out into 2 single 2-man teams or carry on in their 4-man team. Carry on checking the water lines, the riverbeds, the water holes, whatever that case may be, and that'll take you up until the afternoon or the evening. Evening you'll come back, cook quickly. Generally the food is of very, very poor quality because we can't really carry around, the nicest foods that we want to. So it's generally soya-based chunks. You'll have pup, which is maize meal, which is very, very big with the Africans. Tin of fish, tin of beans, whatever the case may be. Working into the night, obviously it depends on the patrol, but generally everyone says, full moon you're going to do a night shift, but that's not the case anymore. These guys are coming in day or night, doesn't matter what time of the month it is. So working into night shift.
So just touching there for listeners, full moon is?
Well, it always used to be known as a poacher's moon, or one of the highest activity for rhino poaching in South Africa, simply because the shooters can see their target and they can locate the animals much easier. But because that trend became very obvious very quickly and rhino started falling a lot during the lead up and the follow of full moon, the anti-poaching changed their ways as well. We tasked a lot of our rangers on listening posts. We put them in mobile patrols with vehicles, motorbikes, whatever the case may be. Started getting our road networks working, patrolling the roads, and we started making arrests during the full moon period. And the poachers realized, okay, this is no longer to our advantage. So their tactics now literally have no pattern. They can come in at 12 o'clock of the day, they can come in 12 o'clock at night, they can come in full moon, they can come in no moon, they can come during a storm, they can come during the clear. That pattern's kind of completely disintegrated. But night work is very important for rangers. Unfortunately, it's very difficult and very, very dangerous to work at night. Not because of the poaching threat, but because of the animals. You need to have a very, very high level of knowledge or experience in the bush to be able to handle animals just during the day. So now at night we're talking about elephants, buffalo, lion, leopard.
Can you describe what kind of scenarios could you walk into?
Sure. So I would say the most dangerous animals for field rangers are not necessarily the predators. Everyone thinks, lions, leopards, these things are the dangerous animals. But generally, they don't look at us as food. We're top of the food chain. Unless there's something wrong with those animals, maybe it's old, maybe they've been hand-reared, maybe it's injured. But generally, the most dangerous animals for us is the elephants, the rhinos, and the buffalo. So at night it'll be very easy, especially if there's wind like there is today. You haven't got all your senses because you can't really hear what's going on. It's very, very possible that you walk into a lone elephant bull or a lone buffalo male, black rhino, anything like that, and that becomes very, very dangerous because you can't see what the animal's reactions are. You can't read if it's aggressive, you can't read if it's submissive, you can't see if it's noticed your presence or not. And you've walked right into its fight or flight zone. Normally you'll move through the concentric zones, you'll walk into its comfort zone, etc., etc. But at night it's possible to literally bump into these animals. And that makes it very, very dangerous. As well as if you do start looking at the predators, that is their hunting time as well. During the day they're generally resting, relaxing. If they see humans, they flee very quickly, but as nighttime comes they do get a little bit more confidence, and it might not necessarily be a food thing. It can be, okay, this thing's now in my territory, he's aggressive, and it becomes more of a defensive situation for these animals. So walking at night definitely has its risks, and it's a lot riskier to the ranger to walk at night. But unfortunately, I would say majority of the rhino poaching in South Africa happens at night between sunrise and sunset. So that is actually when we need to be moving the most. During the day, you're almost in a reactive state. You're looking for signs of people coming in, you're looking for the incursions. So once you find that, you're in a reactive state. You're trying to catch the people they're already in. Whereas working at night, you're trying to be as proactive as possible, showing your presence, walking along the fence lines, showing the poachers that, listen, these rangers aren't scared to walk at night. Because it's very much a misconception, or not even a misconception, an image that the poachers and the general populace have, that rangers don't work at night. We'll be sitting on up in a hill in a listening post waiting for that gunshot. Once again, when you hear that gunshot, it's too late. You're completely in a reactive state and you're now on the back foot. So deploying rangers at night is very, very tough from a management level, because you are taking a massive risk. You never want to lose a ranger, you never want to lose any of your personnel. But on the other hand, you can't just put them up on a hill into a listening post waiting for that gunshot, because even if they catch the poachers, that gunshot's gone off and the animal's gone down. So it's a bit of a catch, but it's definitely an important part, is moving at night and walking at night and getting the rangers comfortable, confident, and training them to know that they can walk at night, and they're not going to run into these situations because they have the training to, number one, to make sure that they're aware enough not to walk into these situations, and number two, that if they do walk into these situations, they're taught how to deal with it safely and effectively and get themselves out without incurring any of these casualties, which unfortunately do happen to the field rangers.
Night vision goggles used at all?
There is a use of them, but unfortunately it's extremely limited. You know, people have this very crazy idea about technology and anti-poaching, especially from the American standpoint, you know, of Afghanistan. They're using the drones and the night vision goggles and that kind of thing. Where the reality of it is one set of night vision goggles, we're talking about the monocular or binocular ones, the ones which would be of use to us. You're looking at maybe 200,000-300,000 rand for these night vision goggles. And what they do is they pretty much kill your peripheral vision and your depth perception. So if you're wearing them, you can't tell whether this is 1 meter from you or 5 meters from you, and you can't see anything more than, I would say, I don't know, 100 degrees. You've got nothing on your peripherals. So they're very difficult to walk with. If you're up in an observation post, a listening post, that kind of things, they're great. They can help you see very far. You can identify with an animal from a person. But in a moving patrol, because of how dense the bush is here in this part, the low veld of South Africa, it's next to impossible to walk with it. You fall over your feet, you walk into trees. It's very difficult. And then you've got these same rangers who we're talking about who've received maybe a 6-week training course. They're quite unmotivated, they're quite unpaid, and you're giving them a 300,000 rand pair of night vision monoculars. You know, those things are going to get either wet, they're going to get thrown into the kit bag, and the kit bag's going to get thrown on the ground. They're going to put the batteries in the wrong way. If you turn those things on during the day, you fry the chip inside it. So I know of, and I'm not going to mention reserve names or anything like that, but very famous, well-known reserves who've been donated. You know, maybe 30 or 40 of these things are sitting in a cupboard because they're too afraid to issue them to the rangers because of how much they cost. So it's a difficult situation, but there is a use for them. But for patrolling and walking at night and that kind of stuff, it might be good to have a pair if you see something and you want to look at it. But to walk with them, the bush is just too thick and they're too limited for that application.
You touched on before what poachers might use as firearms. Yes. Can you describe what a team looks like?
Okay, so if we're talking about rhino poaching in particular, which is what we're facing in this area, generally you're facing a group of either 2 or 3 poachers with one heavy caliber rifle, so either 357 or 458. You will sometimes find 303s and 308s, but I'd say 357 and 458 are the most common calibers. And the team will consist of the hunter or the shooter. He's generally the guy who's shot, you know, 10, 15, 20 animals in his life. He knows where to shoot, he knows where to aim, he knows the functioning of the rifle. He's the most experienced person generally in the group.
We've got some monkeys here invading us. They haven't come into camera yet, but I can tell you there are about 24 of them around, and they're getting a telling off.
If the camera gets picked up and runs away, you know why.
Exactly, yes. And I'm terrified that I've left my sliding door open. You can check, please. Let's carry on. So we were talking about the makeup of a poaching team.
Yes. So generally, the hunter, the most experienced guy, he's gone on, you know, generally quite a few. He's the highest ranked guy, if you want to call it that, within the group. Then the second guy is generally the scout, the guy who knows the reserve. He knows where the animals are. He's got some information on how to get into the reserve. Maybe he's an ex-ranger, maybe he's an ex-employee, kitchen staff, chef, cook. It's generally somebody who's got some inside information with regards to the reserve and where the animals are, how the anti-poaching teams work, that kind of thing. And then there's possibility of a third person. This is generally only in the bigger reserves where they're going to be spending some decent amount of time in there. He'll be the porter. He'll be carrying the water, food if they're staying overnight inside or on the border of the reserve. He'll carry the axe. He's the lowest ranked guy within the group. So that's the general makeup of a rhino poaching group. Obviously there's no rule book that they go by. They can change that up. So that's the general makeup. It's possible there's another firearm within the group. It can be a handgun, it can be another hunting rifle, it can be an AK-47. But this isn't the norm. That happens not so often. Generally you'll find that coming in from the Mozambican border, and you'll find that where the anti-poaching teams are more on the ball. They're making arrests, they're having good successes. The anti-poaching, the poacher teams might step their game up a little bit and come in with a rifle or something like that. Obviously that second rifle or second firearm is not for the animals, it's for the anti-poaching rangers. It's becoming more common as anti-poaching is getting more and more evolved, adapting, as the price of the commodity of the rhino horn is becoming more valuable. They're willing to risk more to get to it. But I wouldn't say it's the norm yet. That it's still abnormal to find a second firearm within that group.
What are the prices?
So it's obviously nothing set in stone. There's no this is what you will get paid, or we at least don't know that. But the last I heard is 100,000 rand per kg of unprocessed rhino horn. So if you've got two horns, which is a front horn and a back horn, average rhino, you're looking 12 kilograms for both of them. Could be a bit less, could be 7. Looking at 800,000 rand worth of horn from one hunt. And that's for the seller, the person who's selling the horn. He's the guy who shot it and who's handing it over. How that gets distributed amongst the group, nobody knows. Obviously the higher ranked person gets paid more and it filters down. But it's a lot of money. It's a lot of money. And then once it's handed over to that next person, he's generally the one who's going to now try and move it and ship it and send it off to wherever it's going. So there's different levels. In South Africa, you've got from the lowest person, who is the hunter, to the person who's issuing the rifle, saying, okay, go hunt a rhino, I'll pay you your money, the horn goes to him. From him it generally goes to a third person within the country, the buyer on the South African side, and then from there it'll get sent overseas to another whole level of people processing it, getting it ready, and then selling it either on the street or making it into ornament or whatever the case may be.
At what point does your role stop?
So we were very much, well I say we, at a field ranger level, the highest person we'll generally touch is that kingpin who's issuing the rifle out to go and hunt. So as the intel comes in and the information comes in, in the industry everyone knows the names of the guys on the top. We know the addresses of these guys, we know everything like that, but it's very, very difficult for us as law enforcement officers on the ground level to get to touch those guys, because they keep their hands very clean. Nothing goes to their house, the weapons aren't stored in their house, the horns aren't stored in their house. They're very, very smart about it. So our hands are full with the poachers themselves, the bottom level, and maybe the one level up from that, where we'll go and do raids on houses, searching. But that, depending again, it's very difficult, because anti-poaching in South Africa is majority privately run anti-poaching units for all the private reserves who have rhino, and their powers of arrest or their authority is much less than government workers and government rangers working in our national parks. So for private individuals to go and do these house raids and stuff like that, it's very, very difficult. You have to involve the police, you have to involve the government authorities, and once you start doing that, a lot of word gets out that it's going to happen, and it's difficult.
Let's hold on that, because I want to come and talk about the cooperation between the different units. In terms of the poachers themselves, are they hardened criminals, or are they just poor people trying to put a meal in front of their family? Where does it fall?
That's the thing, and the misconception that we need to get out of the way completely is these guys are criminals. They've got a risk versus reward mindset, and at the moment the risk versus reward with rhino poaching is the way to make money. Perhaps they went into it, these poor people who don't have food and he just wants to put food on the table. Great, that's I think what 9 times out of 10 any bank robber or small criminal who does pickpocketing or stealing of cell phones, I'm pretty sure they all just want to put food on the table and feed their family. So this mindset of, shame, these poor guys, they're so poor, they haven't got anything, that needs to go right out the window, because we don't say, oh, these poor bank robbers, shame, they're just trying to feed their family, and they don't know how to do it. No, we say we must catch them, we must put them in jail, we must convict them. And then in the conservation side of things, people are starting to get the sympathy for the poachers, because they've got no food on the table, and they've got such a tough living, and they can't get out of that economic level that they're on. Let's have soccer tournaments for these people, or let's build schools for these poaching communities, let's try get them involved in conservation. They're criminals and they want to make money. If rhino poaching becomes too difficult and too risky for them, they're just going to resort to the next thing, whether it's drugs, whether it's human trafficking, whether it's bank robberies, ATM bombings, whatever the case may be. So the poachers we find, and the general rhino poachers, are criminals. They're involved in a lot of other things as well. They're involved in drugs, they're involved in money laundering, they're involved in 10 different types of things. Rhino poaching is just one of them. Same as, if you've got somebody on the streets who's selling cocaine, he's probably selling for somebody else. He's just the bottom of the level, making his buck, bringing it into the boss. So the rhino poaching is the same. These guys on the ground, the physical poachers we are catching, aren't these massive hardened kingpins. They're rhino poachers, that's their speciality. They're getting the horn for their boss, who's one level on top of them. But criminals are criminals. They definitely shouldn't be looked at as poor, hungry people who are just trying to make money. They are definitely... These monkeys are causing havoc.
Let's take a quick break.
Sure.
Kelly, go get your gun. we're having a break, so you've got a minute. Shoot straight.
Causing havoc, these things.
She's got an air pellet gun.
Yeah.
It's a weapon, this thing. I fired it yesterday. Woo, this is good. Yeah, she said there's one in particular where she came in, he was sitting on top of the front door, just looking down at her going, what are you going to do?
Bastards, yeah.
And yeah, he was on the kitchen bench the other day, and just there's one in particular. So if she can identify him, give him one in the butt, then hopefully the others will cotton onto it.
You get the baboons that, yes, they wreck the houses, but they properly wreck them. Sure, my grandparents stay in the wildlife estate as well. They hardly even scatter, the bastards. And the baboons got into the house, and it's worse than, like, it honestly looks like there was a buffalo in there or something. Everything is turned upside down, air cons are pulled off the walls, fridges lying over.
And they shit everywhere.
Yeah, all over the walls, ceiling fans lying on the floor, shit everywhere.
I heard that a friend of mine, his house got wrecked by baboons there. And it was locked, the place was locked up.
They break in.
But he said that apparently there was some sort of approval to get rid of that troop.
Sure. Well, I would hope so, because the amount of damage they caused in that house was just shocking.
Yeah. Okay, let's get back into it.
Cool.
You were talking about the criminals. In the contacts that you've had with poachers, I guess a couple of things. How well have they fought back? And also, once they've been arrested, are they compliant prisoners?
So, people are trying to give you the impression that we're fighting a war here. Now again, I'm talking about South Africa and the experience that I've had. Generally, the poachers we are trying to catch are just trying to get away. That's obviously their number one goal, is to get away, is to not have contact, is to not shoot, is just to run away. So when we are chasing these guys or following up on tracks or anything, their number one goal isn't to fight, their number one goal is to flee. So if they can get that option, they're going to do it. When cornered, or when you're about to make the arrest, is if they're going to use the firearm, this is when they're going to do it. When they see, okay, we have literally no other way of getting away. You've pushed them into a corner, whether it's with vehicles, whether it's with aircraft. So, as mentioned previously, generally there's only one rifle within the group, which is a hunting rifle. They might only have 4 rounds for that thing, 4 or 5 rounds, especially if it's got the magazine, which is part of the rifle. They can cycle that thing 3 or 4 times. They know that the Rangers are equipped with semi-automatic or automatic rifles. And they maybe have 1 clip or 2 magazines, 30 to 60 rounds in the rifles. So they know that they're outgunned very, very much. So generally the most common thing for them to do is either to throw the rifle and run, because they know the laws are rules of engagement, if you want to call it that, that we can't shoot unarmed poachers. We can't even shoot if your life isn't in danger. So generally they're going to just try their best to get away. But saying that, we can't teach that to all of our rangers, because you do get the poachers who stand their ground and fight. But it's not the norm. I've witnessed majority of what I've seen is the ones who just want to get away. They just want to hide. They're going to throw their rifle. They're going to do whatever they can to get out of the situation. But I've also seen poachers who have stood their ground and tried to push you away long enough for them to get off again. So it all depends. It's completely situational. You'll get the types who run, you get the types who fight. But generally the norm is that these guys, they just want to get away.
And once they've been arrested, actually let's stop. Let's go back a moment. If you're able to explain, let's go back to the patrol, either 2 or 4 man patrols. Tracks are found. What are the standard operating procedures?
Okay, so generally people put a very, very high emphasis on the tracking capability of your rangers. Okay, we need to be able to track these poachers. We must be able to catch them. But if you think about it logically, let's say we found an incursion. We're doing our morning fence check. We found tracks coming in. They're fresh. They're 2 hours old. Average person walks between 3 and 6 kilometers an hour. That's just an average. I'm going for a walk. These guys are walking faster than that, obviously. Either they're looking for rhino or they're trying to get out. So let's say they're walking at 8 kilometers an hour, which is a fast walk. 2 hours old, it means they're 16 kilometers in front of us. So now we're expert trackers. We can run and track at the same time, which doesn't happen. Let's say we can run at 10 kilometers an hour and we can track. These poachers are 16 kilometers in front of us. We're running and tracking at 10 kilometers an hour, which means it's going to take about an hour 45 to cover that 2 hours. But these poachers are moving during those 2 hours. So they've covered another, let's say, 10 kilometers. Now we're good, we're running, we cover that 10 kilometers in 1 hour. But now there's still an hour in front of us, 8 kilometers. So a 3-hour-old track or a 2-hour-old track turns up into a 50-kilometer chase running at 10 kilometers an hour. It's not going to happen. So standard operating procedures is, when you find these tracks, your tracking skills need to tell us how old are these tracks. Because that's very, very important, because that's going to tell us how far these guys are in front of us. They need to tell us the number of tracks. They need to tell us what the intentions are. By the way the tracks are moving, are they wandering around looking for something? Are they walking in a straight line going somewhere? Are they walking slowly? Are they tired? Are they resting? You need to be able to read the signs of these tracks. Using this information, you're going to build your follow-up procedure. So you need to know what direction they're moving in. You need to know their intentions. You need to know how far they are and how many they are. Now we'll start the follow-up procedure. If we have the assistance of aircraft, we'll go and put aircraft to the area where we think they are. We'll start putting up stopper groups to see, okay, they're heading east. We know we've got a nice cut line there. Let's go put stopper groups there to see if they cross. You'll try to leapfrog by checking in the general direction of movement. Maybe you can pick up the tracks on another road, on another cut line even further. So generally, once you find that tracks, yes, you do need to track them, but it's not the tracker who's going to physically catch these guys. Unless you've got a reserve which you can walk for 3-4 days and they're sleeping inside the reserve, which isn't the case in South Africa. These guys are coming in, hitting an animal, going out. So the standard operating procedure, once you found the tracks, is let's get the information from this tracks. What is it going to tell us? We need to know how many people there are, we need to know what their intentions are, we need to know how far they are and what direction they're going. Then you'll start deploying your other teams, whether it's with vehicles, whether it's with aircraft, whether it's on foot, and that's how your follow-up procedure is going to start. And from there, depending on if somebody now leapfrogs and you find the track somewhere else, that team will start tracking. You'll pick this team up, take them to go look for more tracks. Put teams on observation posts, listening posts, have vehicles outside the reserve on the tar roads looking for the pickup vehicle. Because these guys, once they've got the horn, they need to get out, they need to get picked up, they need to be taken somewhere. If you can involve the police, put up some roadblocks, get some vehicles scanning for vehicles driving up and down the boundaries of the reserves. But generally, the idea of a tracker tracking up until he catches a poacher, it's a very misguided idea that someone is physically able to track somebody faster than that person is trying to get away. Very, very difficult. But that's where the dogs start coming in, and those have been very, very, very useful in conservation so far. Okay, so my next question was going to be, what new things are you bringing into becoming a more effective force? What are the certain assets that you can bring to the table to make yourselves more effective? The combination of dogs and aircraft has been one of the most recent, what did you call it? One of the most recent discoveries, should you say that, of something which can assist us in anti-poaching. The old idea of dogs is a dog on a leash, generally a bloodhound or a foxhound or something like that, and you walk on the leash and the dog tracks while the dog handler walks behind. Problem with that, once again, is you're limited by the human factor of now you've got someone holding a dog, you're walking, if the handler gets tired, he needs to rest, he's limiting the dog in its abilities. So what they've started looking at now, which has been very effective, is doing off-leash tracking dogs, which are the blue tick hounds, foxhounds, which is what they've been doing for thousands of years. If you think about back in England, jumping on the horse, the dog chases the fox, you chase the horse, chase the dog on the horse. So they've started doing that now, training these hounds to pick up on a scent. They've got a tracking collar on them, and you just release the dogs. Let them run at whatever speed they want. If they want to slow down because they're tired, they slow down. If they want to carry on, they carry on. Jump in a chopper, go up in the air. You monitor on your tracking device where your hounds are. It's generally a team of 4 dogs if it's pack hounds, and you'll see their behaviors on the screen. So you'll see they'll either start circling or they'll all bunch up in one area and they'll stop tracking. Then you take the chopper there. That's generally where the poachers are located when the dogs start either circling or they bunch up.
Will they engage with the poachers, or will they?
No. Generally they'll stand and bark, and they won't try to come in. It's not an attack dog, it's just a detection dog. So they'll bark, start running in circles. You'll see from the actions on the tracking devices that they've found something. Like anything, there's big challenges to overcome. They can get distracted by animals, they can get attacked by animals, they can get lost and run off in different directions. But it's been a very, very effective development with the use of an aircraft and off-leash tracking dogs.
Now, when you talk about the aircraft, it's the aircraft with the dogs as opposed to an aircraft looking with eyes.
Exactly.
Is that right?
we want to use a rotary wing, a helicopter, which is able to take rangers as well, because you need to now deploy rangers to make the rest once the dogs have found them. So the dogs go, you have the ability to follow them very effectively. A lot of the reserves, the road systems are terrible. You can't get to where the dogs are. The dogs are obviously running at full speed, maybe 20-30 kilometers an hour. A human can never keep up with that. It's a very, very valuable asset. These dogs cost hundreds of thousands, millions of rands to train. So obviously when it gets to the poachers, you want to get to these dogs as quick as you can, because the poachers are obviously trying to get away. They're going to shoot the dogs, they're going to hurt the dogs, carry on running. So you need to be able to deploy rangers immediately once those dogs have found them. Generally the poachers are going to run into a thick area, into thick bush where the dogs are barking, they're trying to get away, but you're suppressing their movement. They're now slowing down. Bring the ranger force in, drop them in, let them affect the rest. Load the dogs back into the helicopter, get them back to water, food, shade, let them relax and recuperate. But it's been very, very effective. I can't remember the exact numbers, but I'm going to be spitballing here. But in the last, I think it was 32 deployments of the dogs, they've made 29 arrests in the Kruger National Park.
Right. So it does sound like you have to be quite a well-resourced game reserve to utilize these kind of things. I mean, helicopter is just the running costs, so hundreds of thousands of rands. Never mind the actual helicopter itself, the pilot, his salary. So you definitely need a big budget to be able to deploy these things, as well as you need a big area to do it. A lot of these private reserves aren't big enough. By the time if you find the tracks is 3 hours old, these guys are probably out already. They're very much coming in, hitting, going out. Whereas in the Kruger National Park, obviously, you've got a lot larger area, so there's more room, to try and catch these guys, and more time to try and catch these guys. What are the legal rules in terms of if the poachers are coming in from the Mozambican border, in terms of crossing the border to make arrests? Is that?
So there is, I would say, rules that have been put in place which do assist the rangers. I can't remember what year it was, maybe 2015. They brought in the hot pursuit clause, where if you're on tracks and they're hot tracks and they go across the border, we can just go across and carry on. Obviously you do need to radio ahead to let people know you're moving into their areas and that kind of stuff. But legally they did change some rules that if the tracks are hot and you're moving in that direction, you can go across the border and carry on.
Right into Mozambique, to their village, or wherever it might be?
Oh, to wherever it may be. It's very difficult. I've worked on the border of Mozambique as well, on the Mozambican side, and there is some some difficulties because of the villagers and their attitude towards the rangers. It's important to remember, and it's very difficult. I mean, people like to call it the Robin Hood syndrome, where they're stealing from the rich and giving to the poor. This is the poachers. But I think it's a bit more than that. I think the poor communities, the poorest communities, are always the most violent. It's very easy to rile up a group of people who are hungry and bored. And this is these poor communities. They're very, very hungry and they've got nothing to do. Now these poachers are going into these conservation areas, which is generally a white man's game. You know, in South Africa, if you talk about conservation, it's seen as very much a rich Westerners project in South Africa. So these very, very poor communities are creating poachers who are going in, and the community is benefiting directly from conservation via poaching. That's how the community is drawing from conservation, even though it's not conservation at all, but that's how they're getting money from it. Otherwise, they wouldn't be getting any money. You might have 1% of the population who's employed, which doesn't affect. The other 99% are not getting any gains from the conservation. So the communities are generally tending to side with the poachers, not the rangers. The rangers are actually seen as traitors. They're working for the enemy. They're working for the rich white man. You know, so they actually tend to be shunned from the communities. They can't go back home wearing their uniforms. They must get changed beforehand, and they can't hang out at certain of the bars and pubs because they know that's where the poachers go, and they get directly targeted, them and their families. So it's very difficult for the rangers to operate under that because the poachers are seen in the light of they're the good guys. So for the rangers to do these hot pursuits into the communities is actually very dangerous. There's been many situations where rangers have been beaten and the mobbers, you know, attacked them with these hot pursuits into the villages because they're protecting the poachers. So it's a tough call to do, but yeah, you can do a hot pursuit through the border as long as it's live tracks, and this is on the government side once again. On the private sector, I don't think you'd be allowed to just go across.
Okay. Talking about dogs and helicopters, they have been two measures which are working and showing good results. What's been tried but hasn't worked?
There's many things which I wouldn't say it hasn't worked, but everything has a role to play. I always say we've got a toolbox when it comes to anti-poaching. If I want to fix my car, I can't use a screwdriver to take the wheel off, but there is a job for that screwdriver, but it's not taking the wheel off. People came in with drones. It was going to be our big answer to anti-poaching, and unfortunately it's not an answer at all. It's not even close, but there's a job for it. People have this idea, you know, we put a drone up and you're going to see little people running around. If we knew where the little people were, we would be there, you know. So for us to put a drone where they are, we have to know where they are. We're talking now millions of hectares, an area which is bigger than, you know, most countries in Europe. Not most countries, but it's bigger than countries. So to put that drone on top of an area where a person is like trying to find a needle in a haystack. It's not going to happen. But then we can use the drone for area surveys. We can use the drone to try and locate injured animals. We can use the drone as more of a proactive thing where we fly this thing around and people see it, you know, and they don't know what it does. You can use misinformation and say this thing is able to tell your name and your birth date and whatever. To them, the uneducated communities, or the poorer community, should I say, they've got no idea what this thing is, you know, that they've never even seen it before. So you can use it. There are roles for it, but that's definitely one of the things where I think too much money has been spent on, too much focus has been put into it, and the results just haven't shown. I don't know of one single incident where a drone has caught a poacher or assisted in catching a poacher. Other technology that people are putting far too much attention on, thermal imaging, yes, it has its use. You know, I can tell you about an organization here that bought this thermal imaging device that goes into the back of the vehicle. It cost millions of rands, multiple, I don't know what the number is, but it's 8 million rand or something like that. It's yet to see one poacher, because if we knew where the poachers were, we would be there. So to get this thermal imaging device that's on the back of a vehicle and it can see in a 2-kilometer radius, great. How often are we within a 2-kilometer radius of these poachers? It's hardly ever. If we knew exactly where they were, we wouldn't need these devices in the first place. and as far as I'm aware, that thing is yet to catch a poacher. So technology is a very difficult game to play, because I use the analogy or the example that if you get one of these FLIR thermal imaging things that can see poachers from 5 kilometers away, and you give it to an unmotivated ranger, or a ranger who has no passion, he's not going to catch a poacher with it. But if you find a passionate, motivated ranger and give him the oldest pair of binoculars, give him 6 months and he'll catch a poacher with those binoculars. So the technology is only as good as the ranger who's using it. So you need the passionate rangers, you need the motivated rangers. That's where the focus needs to be put in, more than these drones and these fancy thermal cameras and that kind of thing.
How would you describe ethical field ranger work?
Ethics is very difficult, because that is subjective to an individual. What you see as ethical and what I see as ethical are two completely different things. But are we talking the ethics of people, or are we talking ethics of conservation? Because ethics of conservation, you've got this massive debate of rhino horn legalization of the trade, and you've got your guys like John Hume who are farming these animals. On a conservational level, he's the king, because he's got this massive gene pool of rhinos. He's saving the animals. But on an ethical level of animals, it's completely wrong, because they're now farmed, they're dying of disease, they're in a completely unnatural environment. So if you want to talk ethics of being field ranger and ethical rangering, that's a tough question.
What do you instill when you train rangers? What values are you trying to instill in them?
I think the most important thing we can instill on field rangers, talking now African field rangers, they need to see that conservation has a role to play in their lives. And the biggest way for them to see that is to see how a country can benefit from conservation. It's very great being in South Africa, because we have great conservation. Our country benefits majorly from conservation. Whether you see hunting as conservation or ecotourism, South Africa is bringing in a lot of money due to conservation. So when I work outside of the country, Mozambique, Namibia, Malawi, they're still trying to bring their conservation up. They're still trying to get the tourists to come in, and we always use the example of the Kruger National Park. When I'm speaking to the rangers, I tell them the great salaries the guys are getting compared to them. I tell them how much money the country is getting in, and how the government is benefiting from conservation, whether it's through issuing of permits for hunting, whether it's through ecotourism coming into the Kruger National Park. And to instill these ethics that if they protect this resource, their country stands to gain an immeasurable amount of input, whether it's via money from the tourists or whether it's from the projects now investing this money. Because merely to say that we want to save rhinos so our children can see them, which is the biggest answer you'll get from any field ranger. If you ask him what he's doing or why he's doing it, he'll say, no, I want my children to see rhino when they come. But the reality of it is, the first time they saw a rhino was when they were working as a field ranger. If rhinos went extinct, 90% of our population wouldn't know the difference, because they've never seen it to begin with. So you have to let them know that they stand to benefit from conservation, not just because we want the animals to be here for our children, but the country as a whole can benefit immeasurably from conserving nature and from instilling this sense of conservation ethics. Was why do we need to protect it?
Yeah. Let's go to more the dirty stuff on the ground.
Yes.
How important is intelligence gathering in your role?
That is, I would say, one of the most important aspects on the ground level, because with any crime syndicate, the key players are known. They're known in the communities, whether it's gangsterism, whether it's drug dealing. They're driving fancy cars, they're building nice houses, and they're looked up to within the communities. For us to find two poachers wandering around in the Kruger National Park or wherever you want to look for them is like finding a needle in a haystack. It's extremely difficult. Even if they fire off a gunshot and it takes you 5 minutes to get there, the chance of you actually arresting these guys is slim to none. And that's the harsh reality of it, especially in the smaller reserves. So when we're working on these intelligence levels, I would say that's where, in the private sector, majority of the arrests happen. Up to 80%, 8 out of every 10 poachers is arrested on an intelligence level. Either you've got intel of the person who's handing out the firearms, you've got intel on the fixer who's bringing them into the reserve, or you've got intel from a completely separate resource who says, I see this guy coming home at 2 o'clock in the morning with a horn and with a rifle. A lot more effort does need to be put into that side of things as well, into the investigations, into the intelligence networks, into the funding for the intelligence networks, because like anything, no one's going to do it for free. Hardly anyone's going to come to you because of the goodness of his heart he wants to stop rhino poaching. They want to see that, okay, I'm giving you solid intel, you're giving me money back for my intelligence, for my information. But not many people want to give money for that. On the private sector, you need to give these guys a larger sum of money that they stand to make from poaching rhinos. They need to be able to benefit more from their intel, from giving away this information. Otherwise, why wouldn't they just carry on doing what they're doing? So it's very, very important, and there does need to be a lot more effort put into the information and intelligence networks which you're developing, because a good informer is quite honestly priceless. You can't put a price on it, because a good informer can lead you to multiple arrests on every level. But it's a dirty game. Dirty people play that game. How do you know the poachers? How do you know when they're going to go into the reserve? How do you know where they're getting the guns from? You have to be involved in those criminal networks as well. So you've got to be very difficult when you're playing on that side of things. But it's highly valuable and highly important to conservation is the intelligence networks and side of things.
What about the element that you spoke of, the people inside, the tip-off?
Yeah.
The people inside the reserve, perhaps they work there, perhaps
Yes.
they're a game ranger who's turned bad.
Yes.
How do you mitigate against that?
It's extremely difficult. There are steps that a lot of the reserves take. They do the voice stress analysis testing, so they'll randomly test 5 of their rangers or 5 of their field guides every month.
These are lie detective.
Yeah. So it's a voice stress analysis is like the newest development in lie detector tests. You're not clipped up to these machines. It's not measuring your heart rate or anything like that. It's got something to do, I'm not too clued up on it, it's something to do with, I think, the octaves in your voice when you're telling a lie and telling the truth. And there's a lot of that going around. There's a lot of people who are qualified to do that. So that's one way of doing it. The second way of doing it is making sure that any of your information is a complete need-to-know basis. With your field rangers, you're not telling them their month's patrols in advance. You tell them on the day where you want them to go. You tell them on the day what you want them to do. You need to make sure that the information with regards to the whereabouts of the animals is kept to at least a complete minimum. The most important or most valuable information to the poacher is, number 1, where are the rhinos, and number 2, where is the security. If the security is placed close to the rhinos, they're not going to try to shoot the rhino, because they know, okay, they're going to have a very high chance of being caught. But if they know where the rhinos are at that moment, and they know where the security or the anti-poaching is at that moment, if they have those 2 pieces of information, they can do what they want, because they know, okay, it's going to take the rangers 30 minutes to get here, whatever the case may be. So those pieces of information, or the essential elements of friendly information, are the ones which need to be protected as far and as much as you can. So even amongst your APU, you need to have a very, very high level of not distrust, but you need to make sure that you're not feeding them all this information. Your teams mustn't know where each other are. They mustn't be able to communicate clearly and say, okay, I'm at this grid, I'm in that grid. Your radio network needs to be monitored to make sure your teams aren't telling each other where they are. A lot of the reserves take the cell phones completely away from their rangers. They're not allowed to have any communication other than the radio, which is on their hip. Because the second that the rangers know exactly where all the other teams are, that one ranger out of 20 who is corrupt can say, okay, all our teams are posted in the north, or these are the grids of where our teams are, this one section here is safe for you to go in.
Do most rangers accept that happily, or do they feel that sense of distrust from management?
I think they definitely do feel the sense of distrust, but if the ranger has any level of knowledge about what's going on, he would accept it happily, knowing that by doing this we're protecting the animals within our reserve. So if you are hurt by it, or you feel like you're distrusted, I don't think you completely understand why it's being done. Even on my level, there's loads of things I'm not told, and I just accept it, because I know, okay, if I need to know it, I'll know it. If I don't, I don't. My old employer used to say it's mushroom syndrome. They keep you in the dark and they feed you shit. And that's pretty much what it is, you know. It's completely on a need-to-know basis, and it's for the protection of the species. So if you feel distrusted because of it, you know, do some research and figure out why they're doing it, you know.
You spoke earlier about a desire to have had a military career.
Yes.
Do you feel that there's something that you as a trainer, some skill set that you're lacking, or APUs, a skill set that they are lacking that you would like to introduce?
Not necessarily. Unfortunately, I always say this industry, it's not an industry, but in this game, a military background or military training is kind of, it's like seen as a degree. You know, I think it's because to go through the military training and to spend time in the military, you've proven that you can deal with the hardships. You can deal with being away from your family and friends. You can work well under pressure, especially if you've been deployed to a war zone or an active war zone in an infantry role or not a logistical role. It holds very high value within this industry because majority of the key role players are ex-military. Majority of them are maybe our old special forces, our reconnaissance guys, or something of that level. The key role players in our government side of anti-poaching and field rangers are ex-military generals. So they very much see a military background as, okay, this guy's proved himself for this game that we're playing. So that was part of my reason for wanting to do it, was to get that immediate level of
kind of credibility.
Yeah, credibility. Without even having to prove anything. They see it as that. And secondly, I was in very much an instructor's role for very, very long, and I had all this training behind me, and I wanted to test myself as well. I wanted to get deployed somewhere and see, okay, have I got the medal to do this kind of thing, which was maybe a younger, you know, gung-ho thing to try and test yourself. As well as it was just something I really wanted to do. So it wasn't necessarily about learning skills and bringing back, because there's a very, very, very big problem at the moment in anti-poaching training, where in my opinion it's far too military, far too militaristic in the tactics, not necessarily in the approach, but in the tactics. What we are facing is not a war in South Africa, and the military tactics need to be highly adapted to what we are doing. We can't take military tactics, copy and paste them into anti-poaching. It's not working. And that's what far too many of these training organizations are doing. Copy and paste, whether it's a fire team tactics, whether it's our shooting tactics, whether it's the follow-up operations and tracking tactics. They're cutting and pasting from the military doctrine and putting it into anti-poaching, and you're wasting time on our training. Majority of our training courses are 6 weeks long. Now 6 weeks isn't enough to do half of what we need to do. So now if you're wasting time teaching these military tactics which they are never going to use, 8-man team fire and movement through an enemy, if you can show me one field ranger who's actually done fire and movement, I'll be highly impressed. But yet they train it day after day after day after day. So that is a big problem, is they're putting too much weight on these military tactics and not adapting them to the actual threat that we are facing. And unfortunately, not coming from a military background, people don't listen to you when you say that. They want to apply their military tactics, they want to apply their infantry tactics and all this stuff, but it's actually not at all conducive to what we are doing. It needs to be adapted to what we are currently facing.
What are 2 or 3 key things that should be adapted?
So,
or adopted rather?
In South Africa, obviously it's different all over. We are holding far too much of our tactics with regards to an enemy which is fighting us. The enemy, if you want to call him that, or the poacher, is not somebody who's standing on the other side with 4 clips or 4 magazines. He's not got grenades. He's not going to lay booby traps for you. He's not going to, well, I can't say he's not, but the chances are very, very low. So if we treat every single follow-up as if these poachers are going to lay an ambush for us and they're going to open fire with 4 AK-47s. Our follow-up is going to be so slow because of these tactics we have to follow. You know, every time you stop, you need to go into all-round defense. You know, you need to have 360 defense. Every time you move on, you need to be prepared for a dog leg and an ambush. You're never going to catch these guys because the security around what you're doing is going to take up far too much time. So we need to adapt our tactics to the current threat. We need to analyze the poaching syndicates. We need to analyze the poachers themselves, look at the tactics they use, and develop our tactics accordingly to the threat level of what we are facing. So which means every reserve, every area needs to have different tactics. We can't all adapt the military tactic. Yes, in the Kruger National Park on the Mozambican boundary, the threat level is high, but then adapt those tactics for that. Majority of these small reserves around Kruger National Park will be running around with battle jackets and chest webbing and look like Navy SEALs. The threat level is not 1/10 of what they're training them to do and the tactics which they are using. So you have to adapt the tactics, and you need to identify, okay, what is our threat? Who is our enemy? What is our target? How do they operate? How do they move? And we need to now adapt our tactics accordingly and not use just this net of military tactics for everybody in the anti-poaching industry.
You've got Kruger run by the South African government.
Yes.
You've got a bunch of private game reserves in the greater Kruger area, and that's just in South Africa, or this part of South Africa. There are a lot of private organisations, there are a lot of charitable organisations.
Yes.
In your eyes, what's the level of cooperation like?
It's getting better. In the beginning, it was very egotistical. It was, we don't want to work with you. We know how to do things. The way you doing things is very wrong. And it was very much a scramble to get donors and donor funding. And people were very scared that their donors were going to start giving to other organizations. So they would badmouth that organization to make sure that the funding doesn't go there. And there is still a lot of that involved. But I would say it's definitely getting better, especially amongst the reserves. We're starting to work with each other because we know that the people we are facing, it's not just poaching on my reserve. He's going to jump and poach in your reserve, as well as some reserves have a lot of assets which other reserves don't, such as dogs, such as aircraft. So I would like to say that, especially in this area in the Lowveld, there is a lot more cooperation amongst the units and amongst the reserves, simply because we are fighting a common goal or a common enemy. So there is more cooperation happening, but there is still a lot of egos involved. You have anti-poaching units which are private companies, and they making money from anti-poaching. So they need to make themselves look better than other units, and it looks good to them if another unit fails, kind of thing. So there is definite competition between them, and that's where you'll find this egos coming into play. But as things go by, and I mean we've been fighting this now for 10 years, people are slowly starting to realize that we are fighting the same enemy here, and we do need to work together. So cooperation is becoming more obvious and more accepted between the reserves and the units.
Are you hopeful?
I wouldn't say I'm hopeful. I don't see an end to this anytime soon. I don't see an end to this in my lifetime. But I do think that conservation as a whole is slowly starting to move in the right direction with regards to why we are doing what we're doing. I think a lot of people were very misinformed with what conservation has to play for a country as a whole. As mentioned previously, we had a lot of people saying, we need to save these animals so our children can see them one day in the future. But unfortunately, conservation in South Africa, and I would say probably all around the world, is a business. If something is costing more money than it's bringing in, it can't live forever. And very luckily for us, conservation is gaining a lot of international coverage. It's gaining a lot of momentum with regards to ecotourism, even more than hunting. So there is a lot of eyes now focused on conservation, where before this rhino poaching thing started in South Africa, there wasn't much coverage at all with regards to conservation and anti-poaching efforts. The level of the ranges have shot up in the last 10 years like you can't believe. The pay of the rangers has greatly increased. the qualifications the rangers are getting has greatly increased. So as a whole, because of rhino poaching in South Africa, conservation in general has benefited a crazy amount. You know, snare poaching is all but gone in most of these reserves because of the level of the anti-poaching which has risen. So the benefits which have come out of this make me, I've seen how conservation has changed over the years, over the last 8 years that I've been involved. I've seen how the field rangers are working 10 times better. The results they're getting are a lot 10 times more. So yes, it's very sad, and yes, the rhino poaching isn't seeing an end anytime soon. But this hopefulness that I'm having is for conservation in a whole. For rhinos, I don't think there's much hope. I don't see a light at the end of the tunnel for that. But for conservation as a whole, I do see things are improving, definitely.
Tell us what you're doing in Burma or Myanmar.
Okay, so that's a very interesting project, and something which I'm definitely getting more involved in, which is great. The people we are working for there are called the Karen people. They've been at war against the Burmese military since the early 1950s. It's one of the longest running civil wars in history. Now they're fighting for a sovereign state. They want the Karen state of Burma or Myanmar to be its own country. In other words, they want to govern it, they want to run it themselves, which they are, in my opinion, they have the complete right to do so. They've been living there for thousands of years.
Geographically, where is it roughly?
So it runs along the border of Thailand, I would say mid to south of Burma. It's actually quite a long, narrow country if you look at it, at how it runs. But it's central to south of Burma. So they've actually changed. It was the Karen state because they are the Karen people. The Burmese have changed it to the Kachin state, if I'm not mistaken. I think it's just as a FU to the Karen. So that war has been going on for many years, 70, 80 years, and the Karen have been fighting from pockets of land, very much unconventional warfare, bush warfare. They haven't got the Karen haven't got like an air force or a infantry or a mechanized unit, whereas the Burmese are fighting with aeroplanes, helicopters, gunships, tanks, all that kind of stuff. But the Karen have been fighting from these pockets of bush which they've been protecting as their homelands, as their farms, that kind of thing. Then there was a ceasefire signed in, I want to say 2008, 9, 10, somewhere there. There's a ceasefire, it could even be later than that, signed between the Karen and the Burmese. During that ceasefire, there was time for researchers and that kind of stuff to go in and assess, just have a look what's going on. And they found animals there which they previously thought were extinct. They found species there which obviously need protection through camera traps, through finding tracks and signs and that kind of thing. And then a project got involved in, okay, how are we going to now protect these animals from poaching, from their high value, and from the encroachment of the Burmese with their logging and all that kind of stuff. So they started training the Karen people, some of their ex-military guys and just regular people in field rangering tactics and that kind of stuff. So I think that started about 3 years ago, if I'm not mistaken. So we're training them there on the basics of field rangering. They've been very much involved in a conflict for long. They're more than versed with firearms and military tactics, but they're not so conversed with the field rangering or conservation side of law enforcement. So we're teaching them the basics of tracking, field movement, small team tactics, everything with regards to law enforcement and field rangering in those areas, in the hopes that they can protect their protected areas. So they've set up, I think it's about 7 different protected areas there now, and we've trained rangers from all of those areas. But the biggest thing they're facing at the moment is the breakdown of the ceasefire. One of the rangers was shot by the Burmese military not long ago. There's loads of landmines littered all over there. One of the rangers had his foot and his hand blown off about 2 weeks back.
Is this while they're on
ranger
patrols?
Yes, trying to protect their protected areas. So the Burmese are just, they're raping the land. They've built roads north to south so they can get their logging trucks in. There's loads of rubber trees and rubber plantations that they want to get their hands on. Trees, teak, every second tree is just this massive teak, you know, it's, I don't know how many meters high. And the forest is full of them, and the Burmese are just going in and deforesting and just taking the country apart. I mean, all over Burma, obviously there's conflicts with the Muslims. What do they call the Rohingya Muslims in the north. The Burmese military is just it's a very hungry military, and they're very into their military actions, and it's difficult for the Karen people because they've just been fighting for so long now, and you can see the effects there. It's devastating, you know. They're constantly moving because as the military comes in, they're breaking the ceasefire agreements and literally just moving through villages, pillaging, and it's a crazy situation. It really is. But to see those forests and the gibbons and the animals that are there, it's just, you can see why it needs to be protected. It's just.
So is it as much protecting the animals as it is the forest area?
Yes.
Because you know, without that, the animals aren't going to
exactly,
live, right?
Exactly. So there is a normal poaching threat there as well. Obviously, wherever there's poor people and animals, you're going to find snaring, you're going to find bushmeat poaching. There is a big risk of that as well. So it's not just the Burmese military that they're trying to keep out, obviously. There is a lot of just regular poaching from the Karen people themselves, as well as the Burmese, coming in and setting snares and cutting down trees and making entire bush camps inside the protected areas. So that is a very real threat as well. But yeah, they're trying to protect the forest as much as possible and to deny entry of these trucks and people who want to push in and do the deforestation.
Do the trucks come with agitation people, you know?
Yeah, so
if it's just a truck driver, he's going to go, I'm just doing my job.
Well,
but
that's the thing. It's
more than that.
It's very, very politically driven from what I've seen. The Burmese government or the Burmese soldiers they're trying to test the waters. So from the information I've been getting is the ceasefire agreement that they're trying to provoke a response from the Karen. So they're trying to see how far they can go in. So obviously the road systems is owned by the Burmese. So the trucks can move up and down those roads, no problem. But as they veer off the roads, I think they've got something stupid like a 20-meter rule or something that the Burmese government is not allowed to go into the Karen. So they're sending these trucks in just to test the waters. You know, maybe they'll go 25, 30 meters in and try to provoke a response from the Karen themselves. And the rangers we're training for the Karen are all government rangers. Well, government. The Karen doesn't necessarily have a set government. As is, because they're not recognized as a sovereign state. But it's very political, very, very political, and it's difficult to explain how they're trying to test the waters by going in and doing the deforestation and trying to poke the beehive, you know.
Are you treading a slightly greyish, murky path between the conservation, ranger training, and what you could say is private military contract training?
It definitely crosses the mind. The people we work with there, the Karen, you can see that a lot of them are soldiers, and it's difficult. We try to figure out how they work as a military, the Karen. So I was asking them, like, what's the salary like? And they said, no. You don't get paid to be a Karen soldier. You fight because you want to fight. So their military. The structure is very loose. When there's fighting, you're a soldier. When there's no fighting, you're a farmer, kind of thing. So the people we're training at the moment for their rangering are more than likely soldiers, or are going to be Karen soldiers. So yes, you probably are training soldiers, and they probably do use a lot of the tactics for their military and their fighting. But I think the overall goal is conservation, definitely. It's just a tough question, that. But there's definitely a line, which is you're balancing on that,
You must have learnt a lot as well.
Oh, definitely. I was lucky enough the first time I went over there to go over with my senior, who's ex-South African Special Task Force. So I worked very closely with him, and I learned a lot from him. And then working with the Burmese, it's such a, not the Burmese, sorry, the Karen, such a different culture and a different way. I mean, English language is next to non-existent there, so you're working through an interpreter who's got a very, very loose grip on the language. Just the culture in general. I think I've learned so much on the way that they live and how poor a country can be when it's been at war for 50 years, and looking at the effects on the people and the populace and everything is just I've learned a great amount with regards to tactics, with regards to just the people in general and the society and the way that they live and all of that kind of stuff. It's definitely enriched my life a lot, that's for sure.
I'd like to finish up on a high note.
Sure.
So I want you to please tell us one of the high points of your career to date.
Okay, so staying on the subject of Burma and Myanmar, I would say going over there and just seeing the complete contrast of our Western life and the life of the way that they live, and experiencing that life, being fully immersed in it for a month, where you haven't got any of the creature comforts of home. There's no cell phone reception for hundreds of kilometers, and you are not forced, but you are put into the situation where you haven't got that option of just making the phone call or just getting in your bed or just having this meal. For myself, that's definitely been the highlights of my career, is living like them, with them, as one of them, not understanding the language at all, but just feeling so much a part of every day, fetching water with them, washing your clothes in the river, having to shoot the chicken or pig that you want to eat for that night. It's definitely one of the most bizarre and amazing experiences that I've that I've had to go through in my life, for sure. And looking forward to going back for now 3 months in November. It's definitely been a highlight for me.
Now, I told you a slight lie before. That was actually the second to last question.
Yes.
You're also a member of an You're also a member of an organisation called the Global Conservation Force.
Yes.
Now, look, there are a myriad of anti-poaching conservation organisations.
Yes.
What sets this one apart?
So I was introduced to the founder, but the organization didn't even exist when I met him. He came and did a course under myself. I was the instructor. He came to learn about conservation and anti-poaching, a guy by the name of Mike Veal, an American guy. He lives in California. And after the course, we got to speaking with each other, and I could see he was highly passionate, highly motivated individual, and he spoke about this organization he was going to start working with. So I've kind of seen the growth of this organization from before it even had its name to where it is now, where it's quite large and making a big difference. And the big thing for me was he came and he did the field ranger course, and he worked as a field ranger before he started his organization, so you could get a good feel for what it is actually like on the ground and where the most effort needs to be placed. Too many of these organizations sit from overseas and think, okay, this is what we need to do. But they've never been here before, they've never spent a night on the ground, they've never been a field ranger, they've never met a field ranger. So it meant a lot to me to see him come and experience it completely before he even started what he was doing. And I think he's got, the organization has a very, very good grip and understanding of what life is like on the ground and where the funds need to be allocated to be the most effective and most efficient. So I've been very happy working alongside them and working with them, merely because it was started for all the right reasons, and I still believe it maintains its core purpose of just trying to make life on the ground better for the rangers on the ground.
And they do that with the provision of equipment.
Yes,
and such
equipment and training. They'll generally will send representatives to go and suss out what the situation is like. There were lots of people stick out their hands and say, we need this, we need that. Whereas with that organization, they tend to go and see, okay, what is the situation like on the ground? Where do we need help? Maybe they'll deploy with the rangers for a couple of weeks to figure out, okay, this is where they need this is where they need that, this is where the training is lacking, this is where the gear is lacking, and supply training, gear, logistical help, even just funding where necessary. But it definitely, from the initiation of that organization, the whole approach was something which I agreed with very, very much. And then when they asked me to assist them and to be alongside them, I said happily I'll help them. I'll help them where they want. Yeah.
Well, we'll certainly put a link in on the video and
that'll be good.
and on the podcast. Kelvin Kipling, that's been fascinating.
Great.
Wish you all the best in Burma and Myanmar when you go there soon.
Yeah.
And thank you very much for joining me on Tales Less Told.
Great. Thank you very much. Thank you.